Packers aren't taking a wide receiver in the first round. Unless they do. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to do Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Tom Grossi, wide receiver 1, gets drafted in the first round. Grossi, and today what we are going to do is we are going to break down 5 potential prospects that could be drafted in the first round by the Green Bay Packers. I went with 5 different position prospects because I figured that would cover the gambit. I'm going to have videos released later this week and next week that are going to break down actual position groups, whether it's tight end, safety, wide receiver. But today, just 5 guys who have been rumored to go to the Packers. They've been appearing a lot on mock drafts and or just my personal picks of guys I think would work out for the Packers. We're going to have that all today. And so with that being said, let's start off with number 1. So right now, the Green Bay Packers have the 15th overall pick in this draft. Is that going to change? Probably not. If anything, we're probably just going to get some second round picks for the Jets, if that even goes through for this draft. But the first player on the board is a wide receiver. He is a guy that many Packers fans have fallen in love with as a prospect, and that is the Ohio State wide receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And you look at his tape from 2021, and you can understand why people are falling in love with him. Now, before we break down him specifically, let's kind of talk about wide receivers this year. There really is no top wide receiver in terms of a Jamar Chase kind of talent, a Justin Jefferson type of talent. But there are some very good wide receivers. There's some that you could even make an argument should be drafted in the top 15, and I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 of them go in the top 15. Now, are the Packers actually going to do this? Unlikely. I did say if the Packers got an additional first round pick like from the Jets, then it would make a lot of sense because they could basically have their cake and eat it too. They could draft a wide receiver for Jordan Love, and then they could turn around and get an edge rusher, a tackle, a safety, something like that. So I think still the odds of them drafting a wide receiver is pretty darn low, but we talked about themes in the last draft episode, and what kind of theme is Brian Gutekunst going for this year? Is it going to be a let's help Jordan Love? Is it going to be let's fill some needs like tight end and safety, which are dire? And I'm really, really curious to see what strategy they go for. It might just be best player available like it usually is. But with Jackson Smith-Njigba, he is a guy that I can see the Packers spending the number 15 pick on because he provides a skill set that is just so complementary to the young receivers they already have on the team. And I still think that there is a need for a veteran wide receiver. It's just that the market is so terrible right now. But if they wanted to go and get a slot guy that they could just put right in there and he can produce, this might be the guy. So Jackson Smith-Njigba is 6'1", 196 pounds. I mentioned his height because it's important to understand what kind of wide receivers the Packers usually look at. And I'll dive deeper into this in the wide receiver prospect video. But just to give you an idea, Packers usually go for larger guys. So 6'1" is kind of at the bottom end. 6'2", 6'3", Christian Watson 6'5", for example. And they like that prototypical, not super speedy guy, but big body receiver, possession guy. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is not that guy, but you kind of just ignore that because of how well his performance was in 2021. And I keep referring to the 2021 season in case you aren't caught up on him. He only played 3 games in 2022, so I'm really going to focus on the 2021 season. And in the 2021 season where he blew up, he sat behind 2 really good wide receivers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And when both of them were interviewed, and EJ talked about this when he came on GPS, when both of them were interviewed, who is the best wide receiver, they both said Jackson Smith-Njigba. So that's already telling. But to show how freaking good he was in that campaign, he had an average of 192 yards, an average in the last 5 games of the 2021 season. That is absolutely insane. His total for the entire season, 95 receptions, 1,606 yards, and 9 touchdowns. In the final game against Utah, he had 15 catches for 347 yards and 3 tutties. Yeah, That's pretty crazy. And again, he was consistent with it. Those last 5 games, of course, just showing that he was really, really good. But the fact that he wasn't even the top guy on the team shows why teams are interested in this guy and why he's likely to go in the top 15 or at least top 20. Now, are there some concerns? Absolutely. He didn't really play in 2022. There's injury concerns there. He really had just one amazing year of production. And while it's comparing apples to oranges, you worry about that. For example, the Packers have been burned by one-year production guys, not with wide receiver, but with Josh Jackson, for example, at corner. Played 8 amazing games, and he went in the second round. He was potentially going to be a first-rounder. Packers draft him, winds up not working out in the league. So with Jackson Smith and Jigba, there is a bit of risk that's associated with it. In addition, he is primarily going to be a slot receiver, though I think they could move him around. But I think putting him with the dynamic duo of Christian Watson, oh boy, you can make defenses just lose their minds because the guy has the speed, he has the ability, the route running is crisp, and I think he's going to be one of the first wide receivers off the board. So while he doesn't necessarily fit that prototypical Packers wide receiver, maybe the Packers, they kind of say screw tradition for a little bit and they decide to just go get weapons for Jordan Love. And they could do far worse than JSN right now. And so if they wound up picking him, yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Though, if I'm a gambling man, I still don't think they will. Number 2, a guy that we actually already talked about on this channel. We're going safety, and that is Brian Branch, the safety from Alabama. 6 foot, 190 pounds, and I'm bringing him up again. He's going to be brought up again in the safety video because with safeties, there really is a drop-off in talent. And Brian Branch is not only the best safety in this draft, in my opinion, but the drop-off is decently significant. I referred to Brian Branch as a safe pick earlier because he really just seems like a good football player. He can tackle, which is something we can always need. He has a high motor. On top of that, in 2022, he had 58 solo tackles, 14 of them for a loss, so he can be there in run defense, which the Packers most definitely need. On top of that, he had a few sacks, 2 interceptions, and he had no less than 7 passes defended each season that he played in college. On top of that, and being a solid, really good player, it is a drastic need for the Packers. I addressed this in an earlier video saying, in my opinion, safety is their most dire need. Darnell Savage is, like, right now, their best safety, and there's still some questions about him. We have 5 other safeties that are on the roster because we just released Vernon Scott. And so this not only fills a huge need, but you're getting a good football player. Now, of course, safety is usually not a priority position in the NFL, but the Packers, they've gone up and gotten their guy before. Look at Darnell Savage. So don't be surprised if Goody goes defense and more specifically goes safety here, because when you start looking at the day 2 and day 3 prospects, there's guys there, but the talent and initial start ability seems to be lacking. Number 3, having them go with offensive line. I'm having them go with Peter Skoronski, the offensive tackle / guard from Northwestern, 6'4", 313 pounds. Now, he is the grandson of former Green Bay Packer Bob Skoronski, so you got a little history there. But let's talk about him as a prospect. The guy played left tackle, but he really has the body type to play guard. So right off the bat, that throws things of, are they going to go at 15? Are they going to draft a potential guard that early? Who knows? Then again, he could learn behind Dave Bakhtiari. Maybe he could be a little bit more versatile. Elton Jenkins has done that. He's played just about every single position on the line. And you still have guys like Zach Tom, and the offensive line is not bad by any stretch, but Dave Bakhtiari, of course, sustained that terrible injury, played really, really well last year. But you do worry, as time goes on, it's good not to have to draft for need, especially with the offensive line. Goody seems to always draft offensive linemen. He did it last year. He did it the year prior. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he decides to swing early on one. Skoronski seems that he could be serviceable at left tackle. We'll see how he does in the pros, but immediately he could start as a guard. And that could help a young QB with Jordan Love if we're going with that theme of just give Jordan Love all the support possible. And Skoronski might be the answer to that in round 1. Number 4, this is if the Packers decide to go with edge. I got them going with potentially Myles Murphy from Clemson, 6'5", 268 pounds, 3 seasons, over 10 tackles for a loss in each of them. Last 2 seasons, 24 and a half tackles for a loss, 14 and a half sacks. Guy has a great motor and could probably make a difference pretty early on. I think there's still going to be some development there. And the Packers, if they are going to go for edge, this is the draft to do it. Especially if they wind up getting a second-round pick. There are just so many athletic freaks in this draft at the edge position. I'm going to do a whole video on this, and I've fallen in love with just about every single one of them because they all have some really big upsides. With Myles Murphy, I think he's a really safe pick. I think that you could get him in there while Rashawn Gary is out. Then he can learn behind Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith. Now, there are, of course, some other guys that Goody could take a swing on, but I like Myles Murphy at this spot right in the middle of the first round. I think he's worth the pick. I think he has the body type and the skill set to be a good player in the NFL, potentially great if they develop him well enough. And so with that, Myles Murphy would not be the worst pick at number 15. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a guy who personally, I don't think the Packers are going to do this, and I don't agree with him going at 15 to the Packers, but he's a name that is constantly coming up in the first round, and that is from Utah, the tight end, Dalton Kincaid. And it's not that I think he's a bad player. It's actually the complete opposite. I think he's a very good player, and I think that he could be a really great passing threat for whatever team drafts him. Taking a look at him, he's 6'4", 246 pounds. He's not really a blocker. Can he block? Sure. Is it great? But it's really not what you're drafting him for. You are drafting him to be a receiving threat, and he is all of that. 2022 had 70 receptions, so he's targeted a lot, would be great for a young QB, had 890 yards, 8 touchdowns, had back-to-back seasons with 8 touchdowns. Dalton Kincaid is a passing weapon. Now, the Packers have not had a passing threat as a tight end for quite some time. You had Robert Tonyan, who had that double-digit TD year and then kind of dropped off, also got injured. On top of that, you look back and maybe like Jared Cook, but he really wasn't that good during the regular season. You have to probably go back until like Jermichael Finley land. And so the Packers, why don't I think they're going to do it? Again, they want blockers. Mercedes Lewis, they want a guy who could go in there and block. And while Mercedes Lewis wasn't, pivotal in the passing game, he made some crucial catches, unfortunately had a fumble, but I think that Dalton Kincaid is an interesting prospect. I just don't think he fits what the Packers want in that first round. I think it's super risky to pick a tight end in the first round, especially if it's a guy who's not really going to block. The only other guy that I can think of in recent memory in the first round that I would spend a first round pick on is TJ Hawkinson when he came out of college, because this guy could block and also he was a passing threat. And for him, it was even tough to find his footing in Detroit, and he wound up getting traded to the Vikings. And on top of that, the tight end class is super, super deep this year. I have one guy in particular, I've talked about him, it's Darnell Washington. If there was a guy that I would put money on to be a Green Bay Packer because he screams Packer in everything that they want, it's Darnell Washington. So I understand you have the high target value here. The guy could be an absolute threat, probably be an immediate starter, and could probably elevate that passing game for a young QB in Jordan Love. But for me, it just doesn't make sense right now because it's a pretty high price, and he's also lacking a skill set that the Packers generally favor. So because of that, I would pass on Dalton Kincaid, but his name is constantly being brought up. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Those are just 5 first-round players that have either been mocked to the Packers or guys I think that they could use or they might wind up targeting. But of course, let me know. There'll be plenty more draft prospect videos coming out this week and next week. But let me know. You guys find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or Tom Grossi Comedy, all social media, see down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.